You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Refreshing wild cherry cola meets smooth cream. The treat you deserve. Pepsi Wild Cherry and Cream. Treat yourself.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
When Sauron's eye was too overwhelming and all you could do was open the door and let the sea take you. Oh.
I'm Jenny Williamson.
And I'm Jen McMenemy.
And this is Ancient History Fangirl. In our last episode, we took you through the early years of the Lighthouse of Alexandria, built roughly between maybe 283 or 4 to 271 BC, the dates are fuzzy, in the early years of the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt. We described the island of Pharos before the lighthouse, its tactical and maritime importance, and then discussed what the lighthouse might have looked like and how it might have changed from Ptolemaic into Roman times. And now, we'll discuss the lighthouse during the Islamic period, which is one of the most fascinating periods in the lighthouse's history.
When Rome fell, if it fell, it became a part of the Byzantine Empire in the East.
Yeah, when Rome fell, if it fell, I guess you could say that the Byzantine Empire was kind of what took its place in the East. This is all questionable.
In the Eastern Roman Empire, yeah. Remember, towards the fall of Rome, it splits into two, the Western and Eastern Empire, and this is what happened. And some have described this as basically just a continuation of the Roman Empire in the East, although this might be a gross oversimplification. It's all up for debate, and we're not doing that because this is not an episode about that.
Anyway, we're talking about how at one point Rome potentially fell or maybe became the Byzantine Empire or something, question mark.
Anyway, moving on. Islamic forces conquered the region in 641 AD. And it's from Islamic times that we get our most detailed descriptions about the Pharos, the lighthouse, and our most iconic idea of what it looked like. This is the iconic description, the one you picture in your mind's eye when you hear the Lighthouse of Alexandria, the Pharos. There were 3 structures to the lighthouse, one on top of the other. The first one, rectangular, the second one, an octagon, and the third one, round. On top, we have a massive statue and a large configuration of mirrors to magnify a great fire that can be seen far out at sea.
Many of the Islamic writers describe the Pharos with great precision, but those descriptions sometimes say different things. Interestingly, first time Cleopatra is ever mentioned in Islamic sources is in one of the earliest sources about the lighthouse, in the mid-800s, when a writer named Ibn Abd al-Hakam claimed that she was the one who built it.
Hot.
Sexy. Probably a sexy building. I'm just going to say that right now.
Oh, it was a darkly sexy building.
That's right. It was the Dark Pharos. Hot.
Oh my God, I'm here for the Dark Pharos and also the Sphinx together. I'm done. I'm going to cry.
Oh, good Lord. You and the Sphinx. Get a room, you guys.
I'm actually so red right now.
I'm just trying to get through this paragraph.
I'm sorry I brought up the Sphinx and it just brought up all these feels.
Every time we talk about the Sphinx, Jen loses it.
I do. I don't know what it is about him.
You know what? I'm not saying that the Sphinx isn't sexy, but there are probably, other monuments that are even sexier. Like, for example, the Dark Pharos. Anyway.
Oh, yeah.
I would say that the statue of Zeus at Olympia was always down to clown, so there's that.
But it was Zeus.
Had great skin because he oiled himself a lot.
There are some sexy statues of Dionysus, but I mean,
it's like the whole point of statues is to be sexy.
Yeah, but some aren't. Some are just like...
Statue of Khufu. Anyway.
It's not his fault he was so wee.
He's just so wee.
For those of you who have forgotten, the statue of Khufu was very tiny. How
3 inches tall. Very, very large pyramid, extremely tiny pharaoh. He had something he was trying to prove or, compensate for. Anyhow, I'm just trying to move on. Anyhow, I'm going to start over. We've seen some historians claim that it's here in Islamic times where the lighthouse starts appearing on lists of 7 wonders of the ancient world, and they're forgetting about Epiphanius of Salamis in 300s AD. See, this is kind of emblematic about histories of the lighthouse. One source makes a definitive statement about it, and the very next source contradicts it, or you find a contradiction somewhere. It's all so confusing.
It really is, and I find this to be very true of many of the 7 wonders that no longer are standing, that we can't point to anymore. One source will say this and someone else will say that, and you'll be like, but what did it actually look like and how can that be right? And practically, where was it standing and how did it, look? I do think it's something across this whole series that we're going to come back to a few times.
Yeah. I mean, this is even true, we know what the Great Pyramid of Giza looks like because that's still standing, but there are all kinds of weird contradictory descriptions of it in the ancient sources too, about the colors of the stone and everything. So sometimes you just wonder what people were seeing.
Yeah, and the same with the statue of Zeus at Olympia. We think we know what it looked like because we think it's represented here and we think this is what it was, but we don't 100% know. So, the history of the Pharos' documentation is confusing and a little hard to parse, but it's clear the lighthouse was very impressive in Islamic times. So, when you're looking at Islamic sources on the lighthouse, there's a lot to get your mind around. And we found a really great summary of Islamic eyewitness accounts of the Pharos in an article called The Islamic History of the Lighthouse of Alexandria by Doris Behrens Abu Sayyaf.
Apologies if we mispronounced that. Hopefully we didn't.
I'm really sorry if I did. Here are some highlights.
So one of the first writers that we have is al-Masudi from 944 AD. So he was a historian, geographer, and author, and is one of the earliest Islamic writers to describe the Pharos for us. He writes about it in several different works and at different times. So according to one account written in 944 AD, the lighthouse stood on a foundation made of glass that was built in the shape of a crab. I love that. Statues adorned its summit, several of which had interesting abilities. One howled or roared to warn of enemy ships approaching. One pointed to the sun, and its upraised arm moved to follow the sun's movement, and one was a sort of clock, making different sounds for each hour.
So one was a sundial and one was a cuckoo clock. I'm here for it.
Right? Isn't that cool? Bettany Hughes points out that the ancient Alexandrians from Ptolemy's time never saw an automaton that they didn't like. They loved statues that could move and do things, like sort of proto-robots.
Yeah, of course they did. I mean, we know of sort of automatons going back into ancient history, famously, the Talos statue that guarded the island of Crete, so we know that there were ancient automatons.
Yeah, and Roman coins show multiple statues on top of the lighthouse. So could it be that there's a grain of truth here? Who knows? We're peering through a cloudy mirror, but I just find that fascinating that maybe it's true.
A cloudy mirror that reflects a siren-esque light across the ocean and begs you to come closer and closer towards the Pharos. So al-Masudi also said that beneath the lighthouse, at the bottom of the sea, there were strewn precious stones from the time of Alexander. This was a myth that continued to repeat itself in Islamic times, that there was treasure under the lighthouse. In another account of his, this one written in 955 to 956 AD, we get the first iconic description of the Pharos as having 3 layers, a tall rectangular first layer, an octagonal second, and a round third. His estimation of the height of the Pharos is 377 feet, give or take. He says that the lighthouse has been restored after centuries of destruction, during which its western wall had collapsed, and its original height was a whopping 656 feet tall. He also mentions that the western wall of the lighthouse was hit directly by the sea, and on the eastern wall was a lead inscription written in Greek.
Al-Masudi also mentions the mirror in one of his more mythical stories about how the lighthouse was knocked over by a caliph who was tricked into believing there was treasure at its foundation, and I will tell you more about this story later. According to the story, the mirror was removed in the caliph's search for treasure. This hints that in al-Masudi's time, there may have been no mirror. So there's another writer, Nasir-i-Khusra, I probably mispronounced that, but he was writing in the 1040s AD, and this is a short one. I'm bringing it up because of that mirror. He mentioned that someone suggested to the Caliph al-Hakim in 996 to 1021 AD that he restore the mirror on top of the pharaohs, but the Caliph decided not to because his relationship with the Byzantines was pretty good. This backs up the idea that perhaps in al-Masudi's time there was no mirror, and it also backs up this idea that they saw the mirror as some kind of defense mechanism. Like, it wasn't just like a lighthouse function. And there's stuff that pops up about that later.
Which is absolutely fascinating, and I love that. I love the idea that it could be both this beacon pulling you in, but also it could distract and, potentially be even more deadly. I love it.
Well, the stuff about the mirror's defensive capabilities are mythical. Like, I don't think it ever was actually used that way.
I don't think it was either, but there is potentially stuff that would be less mythical that they could do with mirrors.
Or the fact that, they hadn't had a mirror in so long that their idea of what it was used for had become kind of mythical.
Or the fact that maybe they hadn't had a fire in so long that it wasn't always constant at this point in time. And so the use of it could be used to trick people as well. But anyway, that's just me.
To trick people? I'm confused.
Well, we know how we've talked about how it was like a siren call, the lighthouse, right? But imagine if it had been dark for a long time and then all of a sudden you could see it and then it just went out before you hit the shore. It could be used to wreck ships.
Oh, that's pretty tricky. Didn't even occur to me, but I guess you could use it that way.
It's almost like my father was in the Navy, and I've thought about this a lot. Anyway, al-Bakri, who was writing in the thousands AD, was a historian and a geographer, and he said that there was a ramp leading up to the entrance that 2 horses could ride abreast. The ramp is corroborated on Roman coins. He says there were, quote, 366 apartments inside the building.
It was also a high-rise apartment building at this point.
Oh my God, I would totally live there.
It was all condos at this point.
It was all co-ops.
360-degree sea views. Oh my God, I gotta stop. Anyhow.
I've got to stop because now I just want to live in the Lighthouse of Alexandria in the Pharos.
Get in line.
Inside the building, there were 22 windows that reduced the gale force of the wind. On the northern wall, there was an inscription in copper that was undeciphered. It was probably in Egyptian hieroglyphics. He also mentioned that the topmost round structure was a mosque and that a cavity eroded in the lower wall was filled with columns by a past emir as a restoration effort.
It's time to throw your lash curler away. Seriously, Lancome's new Curl Goddess Mascara keeps your lashes curled and volumized. From the pre-game to the after party, this fast-setting curl and volume mascara gives you up to 30 hours of wear with no way down. You know what? Curls really do have more fun. Shop Lancome Curl Goddess Mascara now on Amazon.
Adobe Acrobat Studio, your new foundation. Use PDF spaces to generate a presentation. Grab your docs, your permits, your moves. AI levels up your pitch, gets it in a groove. Choose a template with your timeless cool. Come on now, let's flex those tools. Draft, design, deliver, make it sing. AI builds the deck so you can build that thing. Do that with Acrobat.
Learn more at adobe.com/do-that-with-Acrobat.
Is there a baby in your life who's about to start solid foods? This can be such a confusing and stressful time. As a mom of 7, I really struggled with spoon feeding my oldest baby. But once I realized that babies can safely feed themselves real, wholesome foods using the principles of baby-led weaning, feeding the rest of my babies became an actually enjoyable experience instead of something that I used to dread. Hi, I'm Katie Ferraro, college nutrition professor and dietitian specializing in baby-led weaning, and I host the Baby-Led Weaning Made Easy podcast. Each week, we cover evidence-based, safe infant feeding practices for parents and caregivers of babies who are 6 to 12 months of age. So, if you're confused by all the conflicting info you hear about starting solid foods, or you want easy, actionable tips on how to safely prep food for your baby, or introduce allergenic foods, or figure out when to drop a milk feed, we cover all that and more, plus interviews with the world's leading feeding experts in 2 new episodes each week. Search Baby-Led Weaning wherever you listen to podcasts, and happy feeding.
So the next writer is Al-Garnati, who was writing from 1117 to 1118 AD. So the Andalusian travel writer Al-Garnati wrote about the Pharos in, as I said, 1117 to 1118 AD. He drew it as a 2-layer building, a rectangular tower topped by a smaller rectangular tower, and a door partway up accessed by a ramp. According to him, the ramp continued inside, spiraling up in a clockwise direction to access the many rooms inside. He didn't give us a specific number of rooms. He describes the rooms as, quote, communicating with each other. And I'm not sure if this means that the ramp passed through each room one at a time or, something else. I'm not sure what that means. He also said that the mirror on top of the lighthouse, and here's where we get into some of that mythical mirror stuff, Jen. This is some of my favorite myth-making about the Pharos. He also said that the mirror on top of the lighthouse could be focused to watch ships from the other side of the Mediterranean, or set ships on fire out at sea by focusing the heat of the sun. And this is the mirror death ray I mentioned in the earlier episode, and also I think it's where he infers that you could potentially watch people masturbate in Constantinople. He doesn't mention masturbating, but we all know what I would use it for.
We all know that Jenny needs an ancient world Pornhub, and that's what she'd do.
I mean, look, those lighthouse keepers didn't have a lot to do.
Watching the weather and keeping the light going to make sure you didn't crash, unless you turned the light off and wanted the crash because you're a land pirate. Like, what else would you be doing up there? Like, you'd have to have something that kept you a little sane,
That's why I'm like, somebody up on that tower is watching you masturbate.
I was going in a different direction. I was going in like the non-shining version of someone who has a job that's quite isolating. But then people were living in the Pharos, so maybe it wasn't that isolated.
We don't know if people were living in the Pharos. I mean, there were apartments. I think by apartments, they just mean rooms. Like, I don't think they mean that those are living quarters. Well,
I wonder if they might have been if you had soldiers garrisoned there.
Yeah, and that's possible, especially because, especially in Islamic times, you catch this hint of war readiness that is attached to the Pharos. So maybe at this point, a mirror had been restored, or potentially it hadn't been restored because these descriptions are quite mythical.
Al-Idrisi, who was writing about 1154 AD, was a geographer, and he visited the lighthouse, the Pharos, in 1154. As we said, he mentioned that it signaled ships via fire both night and day, and also mentions the open windows and the many chambers, but doesn't give a precise number. He also says the waves hit the northern wall, not the western one, which is interesting. Al-Idrisi describes the Pharos as a 2-layered structure, a rectangular bottom layer and an upper structure topped with a dome. He also mentions a ramp that rises inside the rectangular layer to give access to the rooms. According to him, the lighthouse was roughly 531 feet high.
So the next one is al-Balawi, who was writing around 1166 AD. So al-Balawi was an accomplished architect who had built over 25 mosques in his lifetime. He visited the Pharos in 1166 AD, and his excitement is palpable. He is one of our most detailed sources. It's clear that al-Balawi was the kind of guy who liked to get all up in the nooks and the crannies of ancient ruins, climb all over everything, know all about it, and get up in there. I feel you. He came equipped with measuring tools, long strings and weights to drop from heights. He and his friends scrambled all up and over every cranny, dropping strings from every height and counting every room. He describes a labyrinthine structure of 67 rooms inside of the Pharos, like the first layer of the Pharos, accessible up a spiral ramp. There's a ramp spiraling up the inside. There was only one room that he couldn't enter, and that room led straight into the sea.
Oh my God, can you imagine that's the room when you finally lost your mind from being the lighthouse keeper, that you just opened the door and walked into the sea? When the dark tower, when Sauron's eye was too overwhelming and all you could do was open the door and let the sea take you. Oh.
Yeah. Isn't it just like so fantastical? Like you can't stop mythologizing about the Pharos. It invites that.
Outside, the lighthouse stood on the isolated tip of the Pharos island, surrounded by a square platform that sloped to the sea on the northwestern side.
So the suggestion is that the platform that it stood on, with like the walls that protected it, was potentially collapsing.
Mm-hmm. He said the sea beat against the lighthouse's platform on the east and south sides. He describes how the causeway that connected the lighthouse to the mainland, the Heptastadion, was submerged by the sea at high tide. He also mentions an inscription in hieroglyphics written in stone, at the top of the first rectangular layer on the south side, not the north side. The stone around these hieroglyphics was heavily eroded. His lighthouse had 3 layers, the rectangular, the octagonal, and then the round. He describes the structure at the top as a mosque with 4 doors and a cupola. He also mentions a fire that was still burning to guide ships into the harbor. He doesn't mention mirrors, which is fascinating.
Isn't that interesting? I have only read English translations of this, other people's writings about this work and translations about it. I haven't read the original document. So I have not seen where he mentions mirrors, and I don't think that he does. But if somebody has a copy of this, that you have the whole thing and he mentions mirrors in that, please let me know, because I'm picking up a lot from the lack of mirrors in this account, because he's so detailed otherwise. You'd think he would be so interested in these mirrors and how they work, but he doesn't mention them. So Balawi measured the lighthouse, but he used 5 different units of measurement, none of which are in common use today, and people are estimating what size these units of measurements are, but I get the sense that nobody really knows for sure. So we don't know exactly how tall he's telling us the Pharos is. Doris Behrens Abu Saif, who wrote this article that I'm extrapolating from, suggests a height range of 347 to 433 feet in height. Al-Balawi's account is full of wonder. His Pharos is one that's so enormous and labyrinthine inside that you could easily get lost in it, and you might potentially go mad and walk out of that one room and into the sea. But later writers diverge from that account.
One such writer is Zhao Ruku'u, and he was writing in 1225 AD, and he wasn't an Islamic writer. He was a Chinese writer. He was an administrator of maritime trade from Quanzhou, and he was writing, as I mentioned, in 1225 AD. This is the latest source we have so far. He wrote a work called A Description of Barbarian Nations, Records of Foreign People. In it, he described the Pharos, saying it was built by Alexander himself, which we know is wrong. He says there were only 2 rooms in the rectangular layer, one for weapons, the other for grain. He claims the ramp was so wide that 4 horses could ride on it abreast, and it ascended 2/3 of the way up. He also claimed that there was a great well in the center of the building that connected with a river underground. He also claimed a wondrous great mirror on top of the lighthouse, and said that if enemy warships appeared, the mirror would detect it ahead of time, enabling the city to arm itself.
Yeah, and that's another interesting, linking of the mirror and lighthouse as like a watchtower or defensive structure of some kind. It's really interesting.
It could also be that the Pharos at this point in time is evolving. This is hundreds of years in the future. The technology would have changed, and what you might have used the mirrors for in ancient times has now been able to improve with how glass works in different ways, or what a mirror would look like at this point in time.
I don't know if there's been any research done that suggests that they could have used the mirrors in the lighthouse as some kind of spyglass. I'm not 100% sure.
Well, the thing is, I don't think they could have used the ancient mirrors that way, but spyglasses would have existed at this point in time, and they might have changed the mirrors at this point. You wouldn't keep the ancient ones anymore. You would use the newer technology.
I don't know that there was any examples in the ancient world at this time of people using mirrors that way.
Yeah, look, this is my fan fiction, right? I'm not saying it's true. There is no research that backs that up, but just because there isn't any research doesn't mean it might not have been possible.
I think that they certainly could have been stationing soldiers up there and having them keep watch.
Using smaller spyglasses to see further out.
I'd have to Google when telescopes and spyglasses were invented.
The spyglass as we know it says 1608 according to Google. That's attributing it to Galileo and Westerners, so I don't know.
And we have had instances before, when we were delving into Greek fire, where it's possible that the Muslims had something similar that just was not as well documented on the Western side, so we didn't know about it. So this is all a big question mark, really, but I don't know that there's any corroborating evidence that there could have been giant mirrors that you could actually spy on people in Constantinople with. Anyway, so there's a writer named Yakut, writing just 2 years later in 1227 AD. This writer, I believe he's an Islamic writer, he was significantly underimpressed with the Pharos. So he visited the tower with a group of scholars and said that it looked just like any ordinary watchtower. His scholarly friends were equally perplexed as to why everybody was so impressed with the pharaohs. Why is it so impressive? It's not that big of a deal, you guys. Come on. He said that there were not multiple chambers inside the tower. There was no way to get lost inside, and that it was in bad repair. One side had collapsed. He also described a 2-layer structure with a rectangular tower topped by a crenellated platform, with a second rectangular structure on top that had a domed roof.
Our next writer is Ibn Battuta, and we've used him before in other episodes and in our book, Women of Myth. And he was writing from 1326 to 1349 about this topic. Now, Ibn Battuta was a traveler, he was a scholar, and his name has the best meaning, Jenny. It means son of a duckling.
Son of the duckling.
Sorry, it means son of the duckling.
You make it sound like it's like a swear word or something, like son of a duckling.
I mean, I like it both ways. But anyway, he apparently had a duckling for a dad. Or a mom.
Unclear.
So he visited Alexandria at least twice, once in 1326 and once again in 1349. On his first pass, he described a Pharos in a very fallen down state. There was just one layer, the rectangular layer. You could still access it by its monumental entrance. By this point, the ramp was gone. You access the entrance over a bridge made of wooden planks, connected to a second building. In 1349, 23 years later, he described the Pharos as having been almost totally ruined, its entrance now completely inaccessible. Oh, my heart is breaking.
So you can see, like, why it's difficult to get a complete picture of the Pharos of Alexandria. There's so many descriptions here, and so many of them say different things. Some writers describe these sort of fantastical, and I love these, like, the mythology of the Pharaohs I find just as fascinating as the potential reality of the Pharaohs, but it's also hard to figure out what is fantasy and what is reality. There's all these things like the tower sat atop a treasure from the time of Alexander. There was a great well shaft that connected it to a river. There was that one room that you had to walk into the sea. The mirror at the top could be used to spy on people.
That's my room.
That's the one moderately priced studio that Jen rents and finds that it's not the deal she thought it was.
Me and Mark Antony shared that room.
Luckily, the bath is quite large, but it is seawater.
It's salt water, so it's not great for the hair or the skin.
Anyway, so there are all these myths, right? The mirror at the top could be used to spy on people in far-off Constantinople, over 1,000 miles away, or potentially burn ships to cinders using the power of the sun. The statues talked, they bellowed, they moved, they told time. The descriptions that we have are both highly imaginative and some of the most precise and thoroughly measured we have. And some of those ones that sound fantastical may have had a grain of truth or may have been true.
It's hard to tell. Look, we've all known that one kid who figured out you could burn ants with a magnifying glass and was bad and did that. I don't think anyone seriously believes you could do that from the top of the Pharos, but I understand where they got the fanfic from.
But anyway, like even the more prosaic descriptions, some of those might have been pretty fantastical.
There were hundreds of chambers inside the tower, so many that it was a spiraled labyrinth. There were 366 chambers, or maybe just 67, or maybe there were just 2 chambers.
There was a large inscription in lead, in copper, in stone, written in Greek, written in an undeciphered language that was probably ancient Egyptian. It was on the eastern wall, the northern wall, the southern wall.
Some declared that, quote, description of it falls short. The eyes fail to comprehend it, and words are inadequate. So vast is the spectacle. And that's from Ibn Jubair, a Muslim traveler who's writing about 1183 AD. Still others said it was no different from any other ordinary watchtower. And I think the reason, Jenny did the primary research on these 2 episodes. It's incredible. But I think the reason she included so many of these contradictory descriptions is to show you like how difficult it is to parse what the truth is about the Pharaohs and how differently at different times people described it, what it might have looked like, what it would have contained.
Yeah, sometimes it was like 2 years apart, right? That you get very contradictory descriptions.
Yeah, and one of the things we talk about all the time in this podcast is as much as I want to believe history is subjective, it's not. It's always influenced by your culture, by the way you grew up, and by the thing in which you're trying to present to people. Sometimes the only way you can triangulate the truth of something is to look at as many descriptions of what happened and try to find the commonality. And I think you're doing a good job of that here, Jenny.
One through line that you might pick up on here is that there was a constant cycle of degradation and repair, and this might explain some of this variation here. Different writers claim that the tower was dilapidated at different times. At different points in history, it seems all four sides were directly battered by the sea. Sea salt would have been very corrosive to the limestone. One reason the Pharos' height and the number of layers and structures it had varies so much in the sources may have to do with how often it collapsed and was rebuilt. And we do know that this cycle of degradation and repair must have been real because there were many powerful forces of nature that would have brought the tower to its knees many times in its history. Pele, Hawaiian goddess of volcanoes, fire, and rebirth.
Maeve, Celtic warrior queen and nemesis of heroes.
Kiyohime, Japanese fire-breathing snake demon.
Pesta, Norwegian spirit of the Black Death. Our book, Women of Myth, is a fascinating look at women and femme characters in world mythology, including goddesses, heroines, and monsters. With captivating illustrations by Ringo Award-nominated artist Sarah Richard, it's the perfect gift for the mythology lover in your life, including yourself.
Find Women of Myth wherever books are sold.
By the time I hit my 50s, I'd learned a few things. Like how family is precious. Work can always wait. And 99% of people over 50 already have the virus that causes shingles. Not everyone at risk will develop it, but I did. The painful, blistering rash disrupted my life for weeks. Don't learn about your shingles risk the hard way. Talk to your doctor or pharmacist today. Sponsored by GSK.
An all-new season of The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives is now streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney+.
Mom Talk has just been blowing up.
Whitney and Jen are on Dancing with the Stars.
Taylor is a bachelorette.
Saying that out loud is crazy. Like, that is huge.
But all the cool opportunities could pull us apart.
It's causing issues in everyone's marriage.
My whole world is falling apart right now. It's chaos.
Watch the Hulu original series, The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, now streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney Plus for bundle subscribers. Terms apply.
Destruction to the lighthouse is sometimes described mythologically in the Islamic sources. One writer claimed the top mosque cupola was carried away by a wind, although that may not have been that fanciful considering how very windy it would have been up there.
Yeah, I actually was like, I've seen that described as like a mythical story, but I'm just like, actually, maybe that did happen, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that would not surprise me. I mean, there is crazy winds that come off the desert. You also get like Mediterranean hurricanes. Like, it would not surprise me if that is what happened. And also just anything that close to the sea and the spray and anything else. So, we mentioned this story earlier, and now we're going to tell it again in detail, because you know I love a story about things falling down.
Do you? Okay.
You know I love a natural disaster.
Yes, I do.
And this story in particular hints at something. Al-Masudi, the first Islamic writer to describe the Pharos in the 900s AD, tells us that a few centuries before his time, around 705 to 715 BC, a sneaky eunuch was sent from the Byzantines. Those Byzantines and their sneaky eunuchs, Jenny could tell you the tales. This eunuch went over to Alexandria and befriended the caliph and gained permission to poke around in the Pharos and look for the hidden treasure in the basement. Now, we talked about that hidden treasure. We told you to remember it. According to the story, his search damaged the foundations of the lighthouse and the lighthouse collapsed. The mirror was either removed or destroyed during this time, and the eunuch managed to escape the caliph's wrath by fleeing in a ship.
While this story is no doubt fictional, it probably describes or at least hints at real damage. And it suggests that even in Al-Masudi's time, the lighthouse may have been in a state of disrepair for a long time, long enough for these stories and mythologies to grow up around its ruin. We do know that the Pharos was damaged in an earthquake in 796 AD, and maybe that was the real cause of the damage in Al-Masudi's story. This area has always been prone to earthquakes. There are two major rift zones, the Red Sea and the African-Arabian rift zones, about 320 and 200 miles away, respectively. But earthquakes weren't the only source of destruction. Different Islamic writers describe all sides of the Pharos being directly battered by the sea at various times. That would have caused major damage too. The salt in the seawater would have been very corrosive to the limestone, causing it to flake off and become more fragile and vulnerable to earthquake damage.
Tsunamis were another concern, and I thought about this a lot when we were talking in the last episode.
I gave you this paragraph for a reason.
I know she did. She knows I love a tsunami. I'm absolutely terrified of tsunamis. Every time I say things like that, I just want you all to know that, like, it comes from a deep place of fear and fascination.
Well, I think we've established very strongly on this podcast that we love the things that we fear the most.
Yeah, and it's just in case anyone's coming new to this and thinks like I'm being flippant. I'm really not. So core samples in this area show there have been roughly as many as 8 tsunamis in this region during the past 2,000 years. Not to mention the wind was so strong out on the promontory that dozens of windows were needed to keep the building from being destroyed by wind. Yeah, they essentially created wind tunnels. Have you ever walked down a street that is a wind tunnel?
I mean, yeah, I live in New York.
Exactly. And anyone else who does. Like, certain streets in different cities become these wild wind tunnels where the wind is just funneled down the buildings.
It reminds me a little bit of the bent pyramid, which we talk about in one of our Patreon episodes about how there's a wind that blows inside the pyramid. And we don't know why that is exactly, but archaeologists think it has to do with like chinks in the limestone casing on the pyramid.
Yeah. And in that episode, I mentioned there's a very similar natural phenomenon in the tomb of Clytemnestra in Mycenae in Greece. It happens a lot, and it's very eerie when it happens.
Right, so the Lighthouse of Alexandria may also have been one of these buildings that just had this eerie wind blowing through it.
And they might have actually had to build it in such a way that they could release that wind through like these windows so it could blow through and not blow the building over. So it's possible the Pharos was constantly being buffeted by sea and wind and needed repairs in between earthquakes as well, because it was a very seismically active area, and also those tsunamis. Then, in 951 and 956, there were 2 earthquakes in quick succession, the last of which caused a major structural collapse, toppling the highest, 65 feet or so, of the Pharos, by some accounts. It was then repaired, and it's then, after the 956 earthquake, and this is 956 AD, that the Islamic-style dome was built on top of the Pharos. Prior to that, there was a statue on top of the Pharos. Maybe.
It's all a bit confusing, and that's just one account of how things progressed with the Pharos. I believe there were 3 structures and then a statue on top, and then there were 3 structures and a dome on top because they had to repair this damage.
And also because designs change, right? When you get to that dome, that design really changed when you have Romans and Islamic buildings coming in later on. Like they knew how to make that dome in a different way. Not saying the Greeks didn't, but it just wasn't their style.
So despite all of this destruction, al-Bulawi describes the Pharos as being in relatively good condition in 1165. His Pharos had all 3 layers and was possibly as many as 347 to 433 feet tall. It seems to also have been in decent condition in 1225 when Zhao Rukuo passed through. But when Yakut mentioned the Pharos in 1227, just 2 years later, he didn't see what the fuss was about, as it looked to him just like any other regular watchtower. What happened in those 2 years in between?
We don't know. But what we do know is that in 1303 AD, just 23 years before Ibn Battuta's first account, there was an incredibly destructive earthquake. Again, originating around Crete, and that's because Crete is on a fault line. Every time I've been to Crete, there's been an earthquake there. The resulting tsunami from this earthquake inundated Alexandria, collapsed houses, and killed probably thousands of people. When Ibn Battuta arrived in 1326 AD, he found the Pharos in bad repair. Its ramp collapsed and a whole side of it was in ruins. Ibn Battuta mentions that the Pharos was still in use, but it had clearly been damaged and had not been fully repaired. Higgins says that Battuta also doesn't mention the stone courtyard with its protective wall, which means the Pharos may have been fully exposed to the waves from the sea on all sides, and the degradation after this was fast. Just 26 years later, on Ibn Battuta's next visit, the lighthouse was too ruined to even enter, and that breaks my heart.
The Pharos seems to have been completely collapsed by 1479 BC, when the Sultan Kate Bey built a fort on the island of Pharos to defend against the Ottomans. I've seen different things about whether the fort was built directly on the lighthouse's foundations, or whether that would have been impossible because where the lighthouse stood was totally or partially underwater by this time. This area has changed so much. The Heptastadion, which originally linked the island of Pharos to the mainland, has long been silted over. There's no island of Pharos today.
Can I ask what silted over means?
The water carries like silt and soil and deposits it in a place, and that silt builds up and covers a thing.
So the island no longer exists, is what you're saying?
I'm talking about the Heptastadion.
So the Heptastadion no longer exists because the silt covered it over.
That's right. It's been buried by silt. And also, the island of Pharos no longer exists. There's no island of Pharos today. There's only a promontory, the Ras El Tin promontory, upon which stands the Ras El Tin Palace built in the 1800s.
But some of the writers who talk about Fort Kate Bay talk about how its perimeter was about the same size as the Pharos' perimeter, 492 feet by 433 feet. Where is Fort Kate Bay?
So it is where either the Pharos used to be or very close to where the Pharos used to be.
Now, these dimensions are not the same measurements as we get from the ancient writers. The figures we've seen are 98 by 98 feet.
Or something smaller than that. You know, like it really varies, but not that big is what... I haven't seen an estimate that big in the ancient sources. I have seen people saying like Fort Kate Bay is the exact same footprint as the Lighthouse of Alexandria. I think that's a questionable claim.
Yeah, because we're looking through one of those cloudy bronze mirrors you find in a museum, and it's tough to actually parse what you're seeing and if it's accurate.
But let's go with this idea that the Fort Kate Bay is on the footprint or is about the same width as the lighthouse for a minute. Let's just go there and fantasize.
Let's take this down our fan fiction route. Now, Fort Kate Bay is enormous and only about a fifth as tall as the Pharos lighthouse had been. Imagining the enormous Pharos standing on its footprint, you get the sense of the monumental stature this building once had. Or maybe not.
Or maybe not, because maybe that's not how big it was. We don't know.
Picture this. Me, Reese Witherspoon, in London, ordering fish and chips so often they might start wrapping me in paper. I'm traveling with my Wells Fargo Autograph Journey card, so I earn rewards wherever I book travel. 5 times points with hotels, 4 times with airlines, 3 times on restaurants and other travel, and 1 point on other purchases. Imagine getting rewarded for eating a toad in the hole. Wait, what is a toad in a hole?
Visit wellsfargo.com/autograph journey. Terms apply.
You always want the best for your family, and that means only Eggland's Best Eggs in your kitchen. Compared to ordinary eggs, Eggland's Best Eggs contain 6 times more vitamin D, 25% less saturated fat, more than double the omega-3s, 10 times more vitamin E, and more than double the vitamin B12. So why give your family less when they can have the best? Add Eggland's Best Superior Nutrition to your next grocery list. Better taste, better nutrition, better eggs.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
So, when the Pharos was first built, the base of the tower was probably not dangerously close to the sea, but this land has changed substantially since the time of Ptolemaic Egypt. Erosion and earthquakes have all moved the sea closer, and this area has also sunk with earthquakes in the centuries since the Pharos was completed. While earthquakes brought the Pharos to its knees multiple times, there's no record in the Islamic sources that I know about when it fell for good. Its final fall is not tied in the sources to a specific earthquake. Michael Dennis Higgins thinks that what finally killed the lighthouse wasn't an earthquake, but erosion. This is how it happened, allegedly, how he explains it. According to Higgins, as the sea encroached on the lighthouse, the platform with its walls was no longer enough to protect it. Not only had the walls been damaged by earthquakes and erosion over the years, with intermittent attempts at repair, but the sea was eroding the island itself.
The rocky outcrop the Pharos was built on was comprised mostly of limestone, and the pounding surf slowly eroded beneath the Pharos' foundations until it was too unstable to support the building. Eventually, the limestone shelf the Pharos was built on collapsed, toppling the lighthouse into the sea. At least that's the theory. But when did this collapse happen? Nobody knows for sure. Higgins believes it would have been a dramatic, violent event, and he believes it may have happened between Ibn Battuta's first and second visits between 1326 and 1349. That means the Pharos, youngest of the wonders, maybe, also stood the longest besides the pyramids, maybe, roughly 1600 years, and that's a pretty good run. And we have to say this maybe because we haven't covered the rest yet.
Because the dates are so fuzzy, there's a possibility that other wonders potentially were built after the Pharaohs and fell after the Pharaohs. The Lighthouse of Alexandria is often described as the one that was built the latest on the list and that fell the latest on the list, but that is not actually true, depending on the source you're looking at.
It's tough because it depends on what you count as falling, and it also counts as when you think of it as being built, right? Like, it's very contemporary to the Colossus of Rhodes, and like the statue of Zeus at Olympia. The building still stands, but the statue's gone. Like, it's tough, and obviously the Great Pyramids are still here.
So the Cape Bay Fort was built on or near the foundations of the Pharaohs, probably just near the foundations of the Pharaohs around 1477 to 1479 AD. So over 100 years after the Pharaohs collapsed, if we're going by Michael Dennis Higgins' theory. By this time, the Pharaohs' lighthouse was half forgotten, relegated to myth, but it's been rediscovered in more recent times. In 1916, Gaston Jondet dove into the Alexandrian Bay and mapped the drowned port of ancient Alexandria. He documented breakwaters, deep water basins, and offshore structures that would have comprised a large, complex, and busy port, perhaps the most important in the ancient Mediterranean world. While these things are difficult to date, it's believed that some of the port complex goes back to the 1900s BC. The lighthouse itself was rediscovered in 1968 by a UNESCO-sponsored expedition. So the blocks from the Pharaohs are strewn as far as 262 feet away from the structure's base, painting a vivid picture of how tall the building must have been when it collapsed, and how catastrophic and dramatic this collapse must have been. There's so much under the sea that, it must have still been a really big structure when it collapsed, despite all the damage. While we can't say for sure, this hints that even in Ibn Battuta's time, it was an impressive structure.
As compelling as the ruins were, however, the UNESCO team at the time couldn't make much progress in documenting them due to military unrest and a lack of specialized expertise. The ruins weren't revisited until 1994, when a team of French marine archaeologists dove into the bay to take a closer look at what was on the seafloor. What they found was incredible. Blocks of limestone and broken blocks of granite, originally around 49 to 60 tons in weight, some of the largest megalithic construction found in Egypt. And that was just the beginning.
Not bigger, by the way, than the megalithic construction found in the Sphinx and Valley temples next to the Sphinx. That is, I believe, the largest megalithic structures ever found in Egypt, but I digress.
Over 3,300 pieces were documented in total, and in the years since, more have been discovered, including a matching pair of male and female statues 60 feet high. The statues incorporate a blend of Greek and Egyptian styles. The female figure appears to be a statue of Isis in the form of a Ptolemaic queen. Were these statues of Ptolemy II and his wife and sister, Arsinoe I? Did the Isis statue suggest the presence of a previously undocumented temple of Isis near the original pharaohs? We've seen both suggested, and I kind of love the idea that it's Cleopatra and Mark Antony. But it's not, but I love that idea. I know it can't be. I know. I'm allowed fan fiction about my dark romantic tower.
6 bases for statues were found altogether, each of which could have supported a statue of epic proportions. Were they Egyptian gods, Greek gods, a combination of both? Pharaonic or Ptolemaic ancestors? Nobody knows for sure. So maybe there was one of Cleopatra, I don't know, or one of the Cleopatras, because there were 7.
It probably wasn't the Cleopatra we all think about, but I'm allowed my fan fiction that is not true.
Anyway, so also found were ancient columns and obelisks far older than the pharaohs. Some were columns from the time of Ramses II, from 1279 to 1213 BC. 3 obelisks came from the time of his predecessor, Seti I, dating from roughly 1294 to 1279 BC, so just 1,000 years older than the pharaohs. 30 sphinxes were found under the sea, and they all had inscriptions showing they came originally from the ancient city of Heliopolis, older than the pyramids of Giza, 130 miles away. I suspect that these artifacts were moved here in Ptolemaic times, as the Ptolemies had a habit of repurposing more ancient Egyptian artifacts in their own monuments. It's how they colonized.
One of the most fascinating discoveries has been the remains of the pharaohs' original door frame. This frame is incredibly old and was shown on ancient Roman coins depicting the pharaohs. It was probably part of its original construction. A 38-foot-high block made of red granite, weighing more than 70 tons, forms just part of it. Another piece of the doorframe stood 16 feet high. Jeez. Some historians believe there was more than one of these megalithic doors. Bettany Hughes points out that the red granite used to make the doorframe was also used to line the king's chamber inside the Great Pyramid of Khufu.
So, cast your mind back for a moment to the pharaohs when it was first built. The single rectangular granite tower, despite not making Philo of Byzantium's original list of 7 wonders, would have been anything but plain. With its monumental megalithic doorframe, its epic statues of Ptolemaic rulers and Greek and Egyptian gods, it would have fused the iconography of the Greek ruling class with power and legitimacy reaching down from the time of Ramses. It would have been a wonder in itself, and, in the grand keeping of the list of 7 wonders, it would have been a monument to colonialism and domination.
Which is depressing.
Sorry. It's the Dark Pharos in all of us, Jen.
It is, and I'm also kind of here for it. What did the fishermen of Rhakotis think of this monument? This isn't documented. What we do believe is that as the centuries passed, the area that was once the sleepy fishing village of Rhakotis became the Egyptian quarter of the multi-ethnic, multicultural Alexandria, a new center of Mediterranean power, and the Ptolemies' relationship with the Egyptians they ruled over was always strained, to say the least. Ancient Roman writers describe the Alexandrian mob as more dangerous and unpredictable even than their own mobs, which is saying something. I mean, we know the ancient Roman mobs had the power to change the course of a democracy. So that's really giving the Egyptian mobs a lot of kudos.
Well, they had the power to change the course of a theocratic monarchy. They didn't have a democracy. That was the only control over their government that they had, was mob violence.
Yeah. Pharaohs who pissed off the native Egyptian population were sometimes driven out of their palaces, out of their kingdoms, or even ripped limb from limb.
The Ptolemies were Macedonian Greeks, and when they came to rule Egypt, they stayed Greek. While they did adopt some of the trappings and emblems of ancient Egyptian pharaohs, including the royal incest, they also imposed Greek law, educated their children using Greek values and methodologies, and spoke Greek, only Greek. Only Cleopatra, out of several centuries of Ptolemaic queens and kings, learned the Egyptian language. With its vast library and armies of scholars, Alexandria developed a reputation as a bastion of light and learning, and the pharaohs, over the centuries, came to represent a certain towering enlightenment, drawing all seekers towards knowledge. And that's not untrue, that's not inaccurate.
It's not, but it's not the whole story. That wasn't the only way it was seen in its time. It was also a symbol of doom, harbinger of death, luring sailors to an island where the inhabitants might swarm and murder them. And it was probably a symbol of colonial domination to some in its vicinity, perhaps those who lived on the island of Pharos itself.
Did the people of Rhakotis and Pharos, the island of Pharos, have some kind of feelings about the Pharos, the lighthouse? I mean, it kind of seems like they might, right?
They must have.
Did they hate seeing the obelisks and sphinxes of their ancient kings dragged across the desert to lend their legitimacy to this monument to power-hungry foreigners that ruled over them without bothering to even learn their language? To the native Egyptians, was the Pharos a symbol of oppression long before it became one of pride? This is not known or documented. But maybe once, the Pharos was a symbol of other things besides learning, the Dark Pharos, the Pharos that cast a shadow across all of our minds. Or, in the grand tradition of this monument, maybe not. I don't know. Like I said, it's not documented. So that's it for this week.
Yeah, on the side of the Dark Pharos.
That's right. Join us next week, or maybe the week after, where we talk about whatever's luring you to your death next. In the meantime, you can catch up with us on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, TikTok at Ancient History Fangirl, or you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/ancienthistoryfangirl.
Yeah, and if you do join our Patreon, we actually talk about quite a few things connected to this, don't we, Jenny? We do talk about Archimedes' wild and wacky inventions, which we did mention in our last episode might have been linked to those, mirrors that catch things on fire, but not really. But anyway, on our Patreon, we have extra episodes that cover things in depth that we didn't get a chance to. So please join us.
Yeah, and thank you so much for listening, and we will see you whenever we see you next.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Selling your car shouldn't feel like a second job. It should feel easy. With Carvana, it is. Just visit Carvana.com, enter your license plate or VIN, answer a few quick questions, and get an offer in minutes. Like what you see? We'll pick it up right from your door and hand you your check. No haggling, no hassle, no problem. Car selling made easy on Carvana. Pickup fees may apply.